A Russian soldier, with tears in his eyes, lamented in front of the camera. We've lost completely. Every time we launch a military operation, we're immediately spotted. The Ukrainian forces respond quickly, and it's like their artillery shells have eyes, coming down from the sky with pinpoint accuracy. We are so far behind. There's no place for us to hide on these vast plains. The moment our troops gather, we're swarmed with artillery, missiles, and drones. It's a barrage of bullets and shells. Within minutes, entire units are wiped out, and there's nothing we can do to fight back because we can't even see where the Ukrainian forces are. The Battle of Kursk, a turning point in the Russia-Ukraine war. With NATO's intelligence support and advanced weapons, Ukrainian forces have penetrated deep into Russian territory. In just 1 week, they captured over 1,000 square kilometers in Kursk Oblast without encountering significant Russian resistance. Just 2 years ago, this would have been unimaginable. The Ukrainians have vastly improved their tactical skills. Their operations are highly efficient and stealthy, with well-coordinated firepower. Long-range precision strikes leave the Russian army defenseless, and their command and coordination have taken a big step forward, with different military branches working together seamlessly. On August 6 at 12:30 a.m., Ukrainian forces suddenly stormed into Kursk. Many small Russian outposts were bypassed, but their supply lines were cut off. After a few days without food, Russian conscripts had no choice but to surrender, leading to a significant number of Russian troops being captured. Some of the reinforcements were recruits from the Voronezh training grounds, and during their first experience on the front lines, they were immediately hit by rocket fire. Facing Ukrainian Humvees charging at them, they quickly laid down their arms. Relatives of missing Russian soldiers and prisoners of war have begun posting messages on Russian social media, revealing that the Russian forces deployed in Kursk likely consisted of around 12 regiments and 11 brigades, including tank divisions, motorized infantry, special forces, and airborne units, along with 2 special forces brigades. Together, the force was estimated to be close to 60,000 troops. Around 50% of these were new conscripts reassembled on Russian soil, while the other half were experienced troops withdrawn from the Ukrainian front. However, these veteran units have not lived up to their reputations. For example, the 11th Airborne Unit, once the conquerors of Novokakhovka and Kherson, has suffered significant losses in recent battles, including heavy casualties at the Battle of Chasiv Yar. Now it's just a shadow of its former self. The 108th and 217th Soviet Airborne Forces regiments have faced similar fates. Since February 2022, both regiments have taken heavy losses and had to be rebuilt with recruits from the Russian Airborne Forces. The Ukrainian army has now established a military command in Kursk Oblast. Major General Edward Moskalev has been appointed commander, and his headquarters will oversee the occupied territories, including police services. The Ukrainian National Postal Service has also entered Kursk, accompanied by Ukraine's leading retail trade company, ATB Market LLC. Ukrainian forces have been rotating their troops in and out of the war zone. This means that some units that have been active since August 6 have now been pulled back and replaced by other units. This is theoretically a good thing because, after a week of intense combat, some of the troops are indeed exhausted. The incoming units are primarily from autonomous brigades, not independent ones, and are not bound by outdated Ukrainian military protocols. These units are either trained under the experience of their commanders or by Western military standards. On the Kursk battlefield, these units have been split into smaller groups, with platoon leaders carrying out their missions on the vast battlefield, seeking opportunities to break through and offset Russian aerospace forces and heavy armored divisions' advantages. Consequently, many Ukrainian forces have withdrawn from large towns in Kursk, redeploying to more favorable rural positions. They managed to retreat successfully without suffering any losses and are still engaging Russian forces within Kursk Oblast. Despite this, Russia is trying to exaggerate Ukraine's tactical retreat as their victory, but they can't even land a hit on the retreating Ukrainian forces. In the north and northeast of Korenov, the armed forces of Ukraine retreated from Vetreno over 36 hours, and during this time, the Russian forces were elated whenever they spotted a Ukrainian MRAP armored truck or APC armored truck, that their Lancet drones hadn't hit. This shows the Russian army's poor performance in actual combat. On August 13th, Russian Aerospace Forces Ka-52 helicopters and Su-25 jets mistakenly attacked the remnants of their own 488th Motor Rifle Regiment and a few tanks from the 4th Guards Tank Division. Russia even released 2023 footage of their aerospace forces in action, trying to claim a victory. Some people ask, after the Ukrainian army's breakthrough, aren't they worried about the Russian forces cutting off their retreat? The Ukrainians have split their forces into 3 routes, advancing on both flanks to prevent the Russians from cutting them off. The choice to break through at Sudzha was strategic. After a successful central breakthrough, they could threaten the Kursk nuclear power plant and the city of Kursk to the north, especially by cutting off the E-38 highway, a key transportation artery for Russian forces in the Kharkiv region. On both flanks, the Ukrainians can expand their operations. To the east, they could move behind Russian defensive lines into Belgorod Oblast, while to the west they could reach the same river. The central breakthrough to the north has already put the E-38 highway in jeopardy. 2 days ago, Russia announced the evacuation of civilians from the city of Lvov and Rilsk, both located along the E-38. Fighting has already broken out in the Belgorod region, and the authorities have declared a state of emergency. On the western front, white dashed arrows indicate the direction of the Ukrainian offensive. The blue lines represent the same river, which is 70 to 100 meters wide. The yellow lines mark the border between Russia and Ukraine. The area is surrounded by blue, yellow, and white lines, known as Glushko, and could easily be sealed off by Ukraine, covering a total area of 700 square kilometers. There are only 3 bridges crossing the same river to the north, and if these bridges are destroyed, it would be like taking the first big piece of the Kursk operation. Currently, the Russian forces are evacuating civilians from the area. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces are gathering in the Kharkiv region, preparing to cross the border and link up with the Ukrainian forces advancing from Sudzha. Eventually, they aim to connect this offensive with Bryansk and Belarus in the north. This is how Ukraine is establishing a safe zone along Sumy Oblast. Didn't Russian President Putin emphasize that negotiations should be based on facts on the ground? Ukraine fully understands this and is trying to create as many facts as possible on Russian territory, hoping to secure a stronger position in future negotiations. Suppose the Russians don't pull troops from the Ukrainian front to reinforce Kursk. In that case, the Ukrainians will keep advancing, from capturing the Kursk nuclear power plant to taking all of Kursk, and eventually pushing towards Moscow, forcing the Russians to withdraw from Ukraine's front lines. Russia now faces a real dilemma. Unless they pull back 100,000 troops from the front lines, they won't be able to drive Ukraine out of Kursk. The Russian forces currently operating in Kursk Oblast are attacking on a brigade level, but can't afford to concentrate in one place due to fears of fighter aircraft Sukhoi Su-27s carrying Western air bombs. While Ukraine's F-16 fighter aircraft are still few, their presence allows Su-27s to move forward. If Russia were to suddenly pull back over 100,000 troops, they would lose at least one oblast. If Ukraine manages to deploy more F-16s combined with reconnaissance drones and multiple rocket launchers HIMARS, Russia could lose a third of their forces without even encountering Ukrainian troops. Russia is also hesitant to continue withdrawing troops from the Ukrainian front. If they pull more than 200,000 troops from Ukraine, they'd essentially be giving up Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Crimea. Once Ukraine recaptures Kherson and Zaporizhia, they'll be able to send reinforcements to Kursk, and Russian supplies to Donbas will be completely cut off. At that point, Russia would be utterly defeated. Putin now faces a choice: either abandon the facts on the ground in Ukraine or watch as his homeland falls. This was Ukraine President Zelensky's strategy all along: take the fight to Russia rather than battling the Russian army on Ukrainian soil. That's why the Battle of Kursk is undoubtedly a turning point in the Russia-Ukraine war. At the same time, Ukrainian drones have repeatedly entered Belarusian airspace. Belarus President Lukashenko's regime heavily relies on Putin's support. If Ukraine increases its pressure on Belarus, it could embolden the opposition within Belarus, creating problems for Lukashenko. Ukraine might be able to kill two birds with one stone, defeating Russia while also forcing Belarus to change course. In the long run, solving the Belarusian issue would align with Ukraine's strategic interests. The three Slavic brothers should settle their grievances once and for all, so that the people of these three countries can finally live without a cloud hanging over their heads. Is Russia going for full mobilization or negotiating for peace? The Kursk battle came as a shock, cornering Russia completely. Full national mobilization is not an option for Russia at this point because it would mean formally declaring war on Ukraine and, by extension, becoming enemies of the hundreds of countries supporting Ukraine. Russia cannot afford such consequences. Defeat would bring not only reparations but also the loss of territory. That's why, after Russian forces broke into Kursk on the night of August 7th, Russia framed their counterattack as an anti-terrorism operation. In Russia, calling the conflict with Ukraine a war is a dangerous crime, punishable by up to 15 years in prison. This designation means that Russia will not issue a national mobilization order, nor will it formally declare war on Ukraine. Historically, Russia has never dared to issue a full national mobilization. The only time they did, during the late stages of World War I, led to the complete collapse of the Tsarist government. Since then, both the Soviet and Russian governments have been wary of full mobilization. Currently, Russia is trying to drag out the war until after the US elections, hoping that Trump will come to their rescue. But is it really that simple? Even if Trump is willing, the European nations supporting Ukraine won't just back down. The reason Putin has been able to keep fighting in Ukraine for so long is that the war hasn't severely impacted the daily lives of ordinary Russians. Full mobilization would change that. It would mean that young men who normally go to work every day would suddenly be sent to the front lines. Who would want that? Years of war, combined with Western economic sanctions, have already stirred unrest in Russia. Given how unfavorable the war is looking, public sentiment is sure to explode, and anti-war protests could break out at any time. The partial mobilization in September 2022 triggered a huge backlash. Imagine what would happen with full national mobilization. Public anger would boil over, and a coup against the Kremlin could become a real possibility. What's even more troubling for the Russian authorities is that many of the soldiers captured in the Kursk battle were personnel from the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation, border guards and conscripts, all from families in Moscow and St. Petersburg, people who are not to be trifled with. The Russian government is now in a tough spot and must quickly arrange for their release. Moscow has urgently reached out to Kiev, but Kiev is staying calm, saying they hope Russia will return the more than 700 defenders of Mariupol still in captivity. Right now, Russia's defense minister is a civilian with no military background. The newly appointed Secretary of the State Council, Dyumin, is Putin's former chief security guard and also lacks military experience. The new commander-in-chief, Bortnikov, comes from the Federal Security Service, not the military. Faced with a major crisis, Russia's decision-making system is completely devoid of military expertise. It doesn't look like they're preparing to dig in for the long haul. Even if, by some miracle, Putin found the courage to initiate full mobilization, it's doubtful the tide of war would turn. Russia's problem isn't manpower, it's the lack of modern weapons and poor logistics. What good is conscripting another million troops if there are no heavy weapons or experienced officers to lead them? These recruits would have nothing to fight with against the well-equipped Ukrainian forces. A massive increase in troop numbers would only strain Russia's already stretched logistics. Russia's war economy could collapse under the pressure at any moment. Negotiating for peace would mean Putin would have to admit defeat. If that word gets out, Putin's authority would be shattered. Not only would the public ridicule him, but the opposition might seize the opportunity to rise. Could he hold on to the presidency? And on top of that, Ukraine demands a full Russian withdrawal from the pre-2014 borders, a clear humiliation for Putin. How could he agree to that? However, reality may soon force Putin's hand. On August 15th, several Russian units surrendered in Donbass. The largest group to surrender included part of the 488th Motor Rifle Regiment, along with a squad from Chechnya's 204th Special Forces Unit. They had established a large field defense post stocked with ammunition, food, and water, which could have allowed them to hold out for a long time. However, a small team of 14 elite Ukrainian Special Forces, Alpha, managed to overwhelm them. In total, 102 soldiers were captured. Shortly after, another unit of the 488th Armored Division was overturned, with 80 more soldiers taken prisoner. Part of an FSB Spetsnaz unit was caught in open terrain, ambushed, and decimated. About 20 survivors were captured at their defensive base. Next to fall was a portion of the 43rd Railway Battalion, primarily composed of prisoners contracted by some law enforcement agency in Moscow. Meanwhile, Ukrainian engineers are still busy gathering the spoils of war from the battlefield, including at least 2 T-90M battle tanks and several other T-72s or T-90 battle tanks. Meanwhile, insider information suggests that Russia has consistently taken a hardline stance in its communication with U.S. leadership, often resorting to threats. However, recently, these threats have suddenly disappeared. Tactical nuclear weapons have long been a deterrent tool for Russia in this war, but now Russian leaders have almost stopped mentioning these threats in their daily rhetoric. Former Russian President Medvedev, who had previously been quite aggressive, had recently shown a sudden shift to friendliness and chosen to remain silent. It seems that the Russian side realizes it needs to take peace negotiations more seriously to prevent the situation from further deteriorating. It's becoming clear that both sides are moving towards establishing their positions for negotiations, figuring out how to end hostilities, and shift towards a peace process. This indicates that both Ukraine and Russia are setting the stage for formal talks when the time is right. Currently, the UK still prohibits Ukraine from using Storm Shadow missiles or HIMARS systems inside Russian territory, so the reports about M142 HIMARS using GLMRS missiles in Russia are not accurate. According to Russian sources, the Ukrainian drone strikes on the nights of August 13th and 14th were far more extensive than reported by Ukraine and Western media. In total, 117 attack drones and 4 Tochka-U missiles targeted Kursk, Voronezh, Volgograd, Bryansk, Oryol, and Rostov-on-Don. On the morning of August 15th, Ukrainians used multiple drones to attack the Logov train station. There hasn't been much significant action on most of the battlefields within Ukraine over the past few days. Activity has been relatively low in most regions. However, in 3 specific areas, the Russian forces have continued their offensive efforts. In 2 of these cases, Putin's propaganda machine claimed that the Ukrainian forces were collapsing, but in reality, the Ukrainians were strategically retreating to more defensible positions against attacks by the Russian UMPK bomb kits. First, on the Horlivka front in Donetsk Oblast, Russian troops continued advancing from the east towards Pivnichne and Zalizne, while pushing from the south, leading to the Battle of Toretsk. The Ukrainians successfully withdrew to safer positions. The situation in the Horlivka area has become the most critical. Moscow's general staff is under pressure to prove to Kiev that Kursk's counter-terror operations have not affected the operations of the Russian armed forces. As a result, the 30th Mechanized Infantry Brigade, the 27th Motorized Infantry Division, and the 90th Guards Tank Division have launched reckless attacks, often making up to 30 assaults a day, regardless of their losses. The Ukrainian forces have retreated to more defensible positions. This, in turn, presents 2 major obstacles for the Russians. One is the Kazeny-Torets River, which is flanked by 2 sizable lakes. The other challenge is the cluster of cities, including Pokrovsk, Minorod, Novorodivka, and Kurahov, which collectively have a population of around 100,000 people and are surrounded by 6 to 7 mines. This should make these areas easier for the Ukrainian armed forces to defend and more difficult for the Russian armed forces to attack. The east wind has arrived, Ukraine's momentum and risks. Ukraine's momentum is growing stronger by the day. With military equipment provided by Western allies, the Ukrainian army's arsenal has significantly improved. NATO's advanced weapon systems give Ukraine a decisive edge in reconnaissance and strikes. Take the Battle of Kursk, for example. Ukraine's air superiority and electric warfare capabilities have allowed them to track every move of the Russian forces with ease. As the conscription age is lowered, a large influx of highly capable young fighters has joined the ranks. On top of that, Ukraine's defense industry has made huge strides, especially in drone technology, with new drones becoming critical tools in the counteroffensive. All these factors have greatly boosted the morale of Ukrainian soldiers. In this offensive, the Ukrainian forces have showcased a new style of warfare. On the ground, they no longer fight for every inch, but instead use guerrilla tactics, striking with small units, encircling, and then using artillery and airstrikes to destroy enemy positions. This flexible, mobile approach has left the Russian military unable to defend effectively. Additionally, Ukraine has deployed 1 to 2 Patriot air defense systems in Sumy Oblast and 4 or 5 ground-based air defense NASAMS systems in Kursk, providing sufficient protection. Russian planes are unable to get through, resorting to long-range bombing from the rear. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have pushed deep into Russian territory, bringing the fight to Russia's doorstep and limiting the tactical options available to the Russian military. Ukraine holds advantages in air superiority, electronic warfare, and intelligence gathering. Russia can't even move troops or convoys without being watched. On August 14th, German tabloid newspaper Bild reported that Ukraine had deployed over 30 robotic dogs in the Donbas region. These robotic dogs, capable of moving quietly at 15 kilometers per hour within a 3.5-kilometer radius of enemy positions, can operate for up to 5 hours and cost between 4,000 and 8,000 euros. They're easy to carry. Ukrainian soldiers can pick them up with one hand and load them into vehicles. They can carry up to 15 pounds of supplies, including ammunition and medical kits, and are equipped with a self-destruct mechanism that can erase all data if captured. The live feed from these robotic dogs is clear, almost as if seen with the naked eye. Currently, they're mainly stationed near the Russia-Ukraine border, patrolling and clearing mines. Ukraine may also be preparing for another large-scale offensive, expected to happen at the end of August or early September. This offensive could involve cutting off the land route to Crimea or launching massive F-16 fighter aircraft strikes on the Crimean Bridge. Diplomatically, after more than 2 years of war, Ukraine's Western allies have only strengthened their support. The U.S. has openly endorsed Ukraine's strikes on Russian territory, essentially giving Ukraine the green light. In contrast, Russia's allies are distancing themselves from Putin. Even Belarus, Putin's staunchest supporter, has been hesitant about deploying troops. On the international stage, Ukraine is widely seen as the victim, and public opinion overwhelmingly sides with it. At the same time, the Biden administration is considering sending Ukraine long-range cruise missiles called Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missiles, which weigh 2,400 pounds and carry 1,000-pound warheads. If approved, this would give Ukraine a capability that only a few nations possess: the ability to launch cruise missiles from U.S.-made fighter jets over 200 miles away. Putin, in a bid to turn the tide, could resort to extreme measures, such as destroying the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant or even the Kursk nuclear power plant in Russia and then blaming it on Ukraine. Should such madness occur, the consequences could be catastrophic. So, while Ukraine's prospects look good, it must proceed with caution, remain vigilant, and prepare for the worst while continuing its counteroffensive. Ukraine's success in the war shows that it can pull a chunk out of Russia's grip. What if other countries around Russia, those with stronger military forces than Ukraine, like Poland or the Baltic states, decide to step in? These nations have long-standing grudges against Russia. Kaliningrad, for example, is a thorn in Russia's side. Currently, Russia is redeploying troops from Kaliningrad to Kursk. Kaliningrad hosts 2 motorized infantry divisions and 1 tank brigade, totaling 12,700 troops. Russia may be pulling some forces and light equipment from there, but they're likely keeping a portion of the garrison to guard against a sudden Polish or Lithuanian move to seize the region. Belarus is another sore spot for Poland, and Japan isn't staying quiet either. The issue of the Kuril Islands is bound to resurface eventually. In the South Caucasus, countries like Georgia and Azerbaijan are eager to reclaim territories once occupied by Russia. Moldova's Transnistria region, which is under Russian control, could also fall. All Ukraine would need to do is block the sea routes with more drones, and Moldova and Ukraine could push Russia out of that area. Ukraine's advances could also fuel independence movements within Russia's ethnic minority regions. In places like Chechnya, fodder for Russia, the ongoing Russian losses might lead these regions to reconsider their loyalty. If they turn against Moscow, the breakup of the Russian Federation could become an even more serious threat. In the U.S., with the November elections approaching in 3 months, the Democrats and the Biden administration will continue working closely with Europe to help Ukraine advance, while also guarding against possible nuclear threats from Russia. They want to ensure Ukraine gains as much ground as possible before Trump potentially takes office. The US has even stated that Ukrainian use of American-made weapons on Russian soil aligns with US policy. In other words, they're giving Ukraine the green light to strike deep within Russia. The message is clear. From the start, the US has backed Ukraine in defending against cross-border attacks. Putin is finding it increasingly difficult to hold on, facing unprecedented levels of artillery fire. Even if he manages to hold out for 3 months until early November and Trump is elected, the 2 months between then and January 20th, when Trump would take office, will see even fiercer attacks. By that time, Putin could be severely weakened, reduced to a shell of his former self. If he can't endure, he may be forced to either compromise or face collapse. Biden's goal is to take Putin down, or at the very least, severely weaken him, and push him out of European affairs, forcing him to retreat into Asia. Then Biden would rally allies to pressure China from the west, east, and south. Trump's strategy, on the other hand, is to maintain Europe's opposition to Russia while profiting from both sides. He would likely partner with Putin to confront China. So while both Democrats and Republicans share the same ultimate goal of countering China, they differ in their methods.